I'm determined to lead this country and to focus on the issues that are before us.
I can forgive the man, but I think it's dishonored the position, the presidency.
There are a lot of lurid allegations in the prosecutor's referral, but there is no credible evidence of impeachable offenses.
Based on my reading of the report, I wouldn't impeach him.
I don't want to prejudge any of that. I think it's very important to allow the facts to lead the discussion.
He isn't going to be able to hold up under this sort of pressure.
We don't have a constitutional crisis. The Constitution is in place. It's working fine. We have a Clinton crisis.
I believe that the president should now do the honorable thing and resign.
I would hate to see either impeachment or resignation be the final outcome of this. What he needs is a really strong slap on the wrist.
This is a sacred process. This goes to the heart of our democracy.
Now, from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, here are NBC News Chief Legal Correspondent Jack Ford and NBC's Jody Applegate.
Good evening and welcome to this MSNBC Town Hall. I'm Jack Ford.
And I'm Jody Applegate. Thanks for joining us.
We're here tonight in Cambridge, Massachusetts as guests of Harvard University and the John F. Kennedy School of Government to talk about the presidency and the law. With the delivery of Kenneth Starr's report to Congress, a report containing allegations of perjury, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, the nation is now confronted with some enormous questions. We'll talk about many of them tonight, and we'll focus on what Congress can, can't, and might do as a result of these allegations, Jody.
But first, a little bit about our live audience here tonight. We've tracked down some of those elusive real Americans we keep hearing about. We've got a cross-section of folks from the greater Boston area. We've got high school students, cab drivers, clergy people, mental health professionals, and who knows, we may need them before the evening is over. They come from all over the political spectrum, and we'll be talking to them throughout the program.
And to help us sort out some of these complex legal issues, we have a panel of experts also joining us this evening. One of the great legal minds in this country, Harvard Law professor Charles Nesson, and also the director of the Institute of Politics here at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, former Senator Alan Simpson. Cynthia Oxney, who is a former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst, joins us this evening, and another of the great legal minds in this country, Harvard Law School professor Alan Dershowitz.
And Jack Ford, too. So many great legal minds all in one room. All in one room at the same time. Well, whether or not you have a great legal mind, we'd like to know what's on it. You can get involved by logging into our chat room, courtesy of MSNBC Internet correspondent Mary Kathleen Flynn. Take your bow, MK.
Hey, Judy.
You can talk to her at chat.msnbc.com or email us at opinion.msnbc.com and take part in our live vote. The question du jour is, what should happen to President Clinton if Congress concludes that Ken Starr's allegations are true? And we'll be checking on the results throughout the evening.
Jody, perhaps the best place to start our discussion of the presidency and the law is indeed with the President of the United States. President Clinton, in his first news conference today since the Starr report was delivered to Congress, was asked whether or not Monica Lewinsky's version of the relationship was accurate and if he still contended that he did not lie in his deposition testimony. Let's take a look at what the President had to say.
I have said for a month now that I did something that was wrong. On last Friday at the prayer breakfast, I laid out as carefully and as brutally honestly as I could what I believe the essential truth to be. I also said then, and I will say again, that I think that the right thing for our country and the right thing for all people concerned is not to get mired in all the details here, but to focus, for me to focus on what I did, to acknowledge it, to atone for it, and then to work on my family, where I still have a lot of work to do, difficult work.
All right, I don't know if I took my ginkgo today, so I don't think I can remember everybody's names, but I'm going to ask you to stand up and remind us of your name. Father, I guess it's Father, and tell us what you...
Actually, yes, I have 4 children to prove it. So.
You're a father 4 times over. So what do you think about President Clinton's statement that he doesn't want to get mired down in details? I mean, to a great extent, the law is about details. Why doesn't he want to get mired down in them?
Well, frankly, I think he understands he's in a great deal of trouble. And the way to get out of it is to try and divert attention from the real issues. And right now, the real issues are, I believe, his behavior and whether he is a credible president, whether that's helpful to our country. I believe at this point, he's indicating that he'd like not to deal with those issues.
Do you think it's important that we decide whether he's a criminal or a sinner? In other words, is it important to make that distinction? And as a man of the cloth, I'm wondering what your take on that. The White House is trying to position him as simply a sinner and no more. Do you buy that?
Well, I'm a lucky guy. I have a Bible to help me out, and the Bible says there are 2 kingdoms, kingdom of man and kingdom of God. Kingdom of God, if you wrong me, I forgive you. Kingdom of man, we're bound to uphold the law. And the law is that if you do wrong, you're punished for it.
All right, Father, thanks very much. Who thinks President Clinton has broken the law? Sir, if you would stand up and remind us of your name.
I suppose I want to follow after the Reverend. My name is Thomas Groom. I teach theology at Boston College. There is a broader tradition of Christian ethics, I think.
You know what I'm doing? I'm moving you around so we
Wonderful.
folks on camera.
Well,
I'm not trying to dance with you, although we could do that later.
Shall we?
Just want to make sure the folks at home could see it.
There is a broader tradition of Christian ethics within which, when we talked about sexual morality, we always make a distinction of degree. Between hand-holding and intercourse, there obviously are degrees of culpability and degrees of gravity. And within the tradition of Christian ethics, we have always reserved the term sexual relations for sexual intercourse. If somebody did not have sexual intercourse, they were not considered having sexual relations. Now, this is a distinction the moralists made, perhaps the legalists did not. In other words, someplace tucked back in the president's conscience was the sense that as long as he did not have sexual intercourse, that he wasn't having sexual relations. So I'm inclined to believe that he had a genuine basis, at least in his conscience, which he may have learned back in Sunday school, that in fact he did not have sexual relations. It is a moral distinction that is made, and I think it's time that somebody else made it in the public forum.
All right, well, you've made it here tonight. Thanks very much, Jack. I'm interested to find out if your panel agrees with that distinction that some have criticized as being overly legalistic.
Let's do this. As we're talking about legalisms here, let's set the legal stage, if we might, for the discussion we're going to have about the presidency and the law. Professor Dershowitz, what does the Constitution of the United States say about impeachment of the president?
Well, first, let's remember, the Constitution is not the Bible. It was not written by God. It was written by fallible human beings, and they didn't think through this problem in advance. They used language that was available to them from the English common law: treason, bribery, high crimes, or misdemeanors. Today, we don't even know what the word misdemeanors really means. It doesn't mean less than a felony. It had a different meaning at the time of the Constitution. The sense that you get out of these words is that it ought to be a crime of state, a crime involving the ability to govern. You know, President Ford once said that an impeachable offense is anything that the majority of the House says it is, and that's often quoted, but what's not quoted is that he then said, I was only talking about impeaching a judge. Right. The president requires crimes of the magnitude of treason and bribery, and we have one precedent. The precedent is the Nixon impeachment, and that precedent, in the Nixon impeachment articles, there was one article that charged him with having cheated on his taxes, namely having committed the analogy to personal perjury, lied under oath by signing a tax return that was false. And in a bipartisan vote, the Judiciary Committee said, no, that doesn't rise to the level of an impeachable offense.
Let's do this. Let's hold that for a moment, because I want to get into some of the specifics here that have been contained in Kenneth Starr's report. Let's talk a little bit about what is not in the Constitution. Professor Nesson, we know that all it says is treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. We are used to the term misdemeanor describing a minor criminal event in our judicial codes. Is that what it means here in the Constitution?
I can't tell you what it means. I honestly don't know what it means.
And is that essentially what you're saying now? Does that sort of encapsulate the entire difficulty that we're having with this struggle here, not really knowing what it means?
Well, I think that people know what credibility is about. And I think that's the basic issue here. We have a president who has shown a disrespect for the law. He is the leader of the country and should be the person who most embodies the values of the country. And to me, the most basic value of the country is respect for the rule of law. Not at the level of you have to never go through a stop sign or never take a left turn, but when he's put to it under oath, tell the truth, and he fails to, and then covers it up, and then doesn't come forward when asked point blank, have you lied? Still kind of dodging like he's being defended as a white-collar criminal. That, to me, poses the issue of credibility, which is fundamental to leadership. I think it will turn out to be fundamental to the way this process unfolds.
As we stay with the sort of broader picture for a few moments before we get to the specifics, Senator Simpson, nearly 20 years in the Senate, you sat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. As a senator, if you're confronted with something like this, where do you look? Where do you go to try to get your guidance if the only thing that the U.S. Constitution says to you is high crimes and misdemeanors with no definitions?
Those were two of the worst things I ever went through. I went through 2 impeachment hearings. The Senate sits as a jury. It's the most extraordinary exercise. The House members come over and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee presents the prosecution and someone on the committee presents the defense, and the Senate sits, and our leader said, you will sit in your chairs too, which is very difficult for us. And we sat for days. And it is just numbing. And I can't imagine what it would be if that ever came to the Senate. It would be an unbelievably potent.
Let me ask you to hold your thought for 1 second here, because I want to come back and talk a little bit more about that. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back to continue our town hall meeting here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as we discuss the presidency and the law after these messages. Stay with us.
salacious allegations in this referral are simply intended to humiliate, embarrass, and politically damage the president. In short, this is personal and not impeachable.
David Kendall is not the one who's going to determine what's impeachable or what isn't. It's the House of Representatives. And they can use almost any standard they want to determine what is or is not impeachable.
Welcome back. We're talking here with
Barbara Hill.
And what do you do, Barbara?
I'm at home with my children.
Not right now, you're not.
Not right now.
Someone's
They're
keeping an
sleeping.
eye on them.
They're
I hope so.
sleeping.
All right. So the president's lawyers have said that what he's done is not impeachable. Do you agree?
It may or may not be impeachable. Whether or not the House then chooses to pursue impeachment is a whole other story. There are many people who, when presented with this set of allegations, would have said, this is not something I want to pursue. There are so many of our elected and appointed officials who get reelected or who still get appointed despite salacious allegations about their personal life.
I knew we couldn't get more than 10 minutes into the show without that S word. Salacious. It's the word of the week. All right, what do you think? Do you think the president's lawyers are splitting hairs over what's impeachable and what's not, and what's a crime and what's not?
I think that's their job. I would be very disappointed if they didn't split hairs. They're put in a rather unusual position, and they have to take a position, and the only way they can do it is to analyze the words.
What's your name, by the way?
Sandy Steele, and I come from Boston.
Are you a lawyer?
Yes.
Would you have offered that if I hadn't pinned you down?
No, I wouldn't have.
So you would have given an incomplete answer, but legally accurate.
Evasive.
Although that was pretty direct. All right, but be careful because we've got a retired police officer here. What's your name, sir?
Wendell Wallace.
Wendell Wallace. That's a great name. Do you think the president has broken the law?
Yes,
How so?
it's adultery in any shape, manner, or the form. What was behind the door is private, has now been public, so there is no more privacy. He was wrong. We trusted him to lead us morally. We trusted our country in his hands. We trusted him to defend us, and he let us down. He lied. He said he did not have relationships with this young lady, and in turn he says he did have relationships. So he lied to the American public.
Who disagrees with Mr. Wallace? Anybody? You and your name?
Reverend Zena Jacques. I'm a pastor of a church about a mile from here. And I'm struggling with not whether the president was wrong. He was. He lied. He has acted poorly. But in all of the discussion I've heard, in all of the reading I've done, I can't find anybody who's asking the question, not what's right, because the Sadducees and the Pharisees in ancient times dealt with what was right, but what's wise. The difference in being right and wise is crucial. It might be right to impeach him, but in the second year of a successful time in office, according to how this country is moving forward, is it wise? I surveyed the members of my church on Sunday, and behind me are the pieces of paper they gave me. I asked them whether he should be impeached. I asked them whether they thought he could govern the country. And with eloquence that defies anything I've read in our nation's paper, with eloquence that defies anything I've heard from the media, men and women, blue-collar, welfare workers, and faculty members from this august institution, as well as MIT, said, the wisdom is we go forward. He should be punished, but what is right in terms of the punishment has also to take into consideration what's wise for the forward movement of our country. Censure him, but allow him to live out and finish out what he's doing because it's wise for our country.
Reverend, thank you very much. And we hear that sort of sentiment echoed in the poll numbers. And we're hearing it applauded here tonight. Obviously a popular opinion, but one of the questions is how much, if at all, should public opinion matter when it comes to the law? And then, Jack, that's what you and your panel are going to talk about right now.
Senator Simpson, how about that? How about the notion of public opinion? We talked before, Professor Dershowitz mentioned Gerald Ford's comment that an impeachable offense is essentially whatever Congress says it is at that point in time. There are a lot of folks out there that don't trust Congress. Why should they be able to trust Congress to do what is right here when there's no definition for them to follow?
Well, none of them read the Starr report either. And when the hearing starts, the old boy at the table is going to jab Ma and say, Have you seen this stuff? And have you seen the way the lawyers are cutting the salami here? Have you ever seen anything like this in your life?
Is that a judicial term, cutting the salami?
Yeah, you need an electron microscope to discern the slices with the way the language is being used. But the real thing is this: it doesn't matter about impeachment or impeachable or censure plus. The issue is this man has been deceitful. He deceived his wife. He deceived his daughter. He deceived his most trusted advisors. He deceived his cabinet. If that's what you want, it's what you get.
But in terms of when you, in terms, Cynthia, let me get you in this. We got about a minute here before we have to take a break here. But how do you then defend against something? I want to put you in the position here, not your former job as a prosecutor. I'm put you in the position of being one of the president's attorneys. How do you defend that when you have this amorphous concept out there, which might mean something to somebody, and to a very well-intentioned person over here, it might be something entirely different?
Well, I'll tell you what, his lawyers have the fundamental problem, and that is that legally they must go down one road, and politically they must go down a different road, and they don't go the same place. And there's no answer for them there because of where they are based on the president's conduct and how he has testified so many times differently.
What I want to do here, let me break in. Take a break here. When we come back, I want to take a look at some of the specifics in that report. And let's see if they fall within the categories of high crimes, misdemeanors. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a few moments. Stay with us. And welcome back to our town hall meeting. We're here at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. We got a big crowd out here along with some experts on our panel here. Let's go back to what we were talking about just a few moments ago, and that is the difficulty in defining what constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors. Let's look at some of the allegations in the Starr report and give me some opinions. Perjury. The allegation that the President of the United States was involved with a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky and lied about it. Professor Dershowitz, high crime and misdemeanor.
It all depends. If it's perjury about a matter of high state concern, whether or not we're fighting a war, whether or not, by the way, even then, there's no question Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of our great presidents, completely deceived the American public about his desire to get us into World War II, and we credit him for it. Iran-Contra was obviously based on deceit. If it's perjury about a tax return, no. If it's perjury about a sexual affair, most definitely no. We don't want to reintroduce the kind of sexual McCarthyism into the public dialogue that we had when J. Edgar Hoover tried to get Martin Luther King by tape recording his sexual liaisons, when Joseph McCarthy tried to get people. And by the way, they always say it's not about sex. It's about national security. It's about character. It's about honesty. You know what it is? It's about sex. That's what it's about.
Professor Nesson, how about this? We got about a minute here. How about a different type of lie? How about not lying about a sexual relationship? How about looking at the public in the eye, literally and figuratively, and saying, I didn't have a sexual relationship with that woman, Monica Lewinsky? Lying to the public. Is that different from lying about a sexual relationship, breaking a covenant with the public? Does that fall within high crimes and misdemeanors?
I don't think it's just a matter of him having lied. He was actually put on the spot where he was asked to tell the truth. And the issue was he telling the truth? And so he actually lied about himself as a truth teller. He asked the public, he asked his colleagues to commit to him as a matter of personal trust. And he looked us in the eye and lied to us. Now, that doesn't mean to me it's impeachable if he acts appropriately from here to there. We're still in a process. So there's still many steps to be taken. But if he stays recalcitrant, if he stays with his hair-splitting lawyers, it's impeachable.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back to continue our discussion on the presidency and the law. Stay with us.
Once again, here are NBC's Jack Ford and Jody Applegate.
And once again, here's MSNBC's internet correspondent, Mary Kathleen Flynn. We got a lot of folks taking part in the chat room, right?
Oh my goodness, we have about 700 chatting online right now, 10 chat rooms open. People are pretty angry there. They've been very angry, Jody, since January at the president, and their anger only seems to increase. They are most angry about the president lying. They keep telling me that it's not about sex, that it's about lying. They also bring up obstruction of justice, witness tampering. Sometimes the conversation does get pretty legalistic. But we've got a live vote up where we're asking people what should happen to Clinton if Congress concludes Starr's allegations are true. So far, we've had almost 30,000 people responding, more than 30,000 people responding, 77% of whom, Jody, say impeach him. 14% say censure or rebuke, and then 9% say the charges are minor, no punishment.
All right, MK, we'll check in with you a little bit later on. Who's got a viewpoint you haven't heard expressed here yet tonight? Let me ask you. What's your name?
My name is Darian Unger. I'm from MIT.
Simon says stand up, please, Darian.
No problem.
All right, thanks very much. What do you think, Darian?
I think that Congress, as short-sighted as we've been seeing recently, may in fact make this worse. If you think about it, almost half of Congress sent themselves to prison by releasing this onto the internet when that violated their own Communications Decency Act, which was unconstitutional.
Darian. All right, who thinks Darian is picking nits here tonight? Legal hair splitting.
Well, I think that a Congress that can go ahead and try to define things so closely will go ahead and try to define everything that President Clinton has done, and may, in fact, try to impeach him on such maybe immoral, but certainly not high crime charges.
So the law is not an exact science. It can be like nailing Jell-O to the wall sometimes. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Although you have a microphone of your own and a headset, so you know more than I do. What's your name?
My name is Paul Watanabe, and I'm a political scientist. The thing that I think is so interesting and where the real hair splitting is taking place is all this high-minded talk about deceit, immorality, and lying. I have no problem having a real discussion about this. But having people in power, former United States senators and so forth, talking in such a high-minded way about this, we really want to have a discussion about deceit, lying, immorality in high places. I'm willing to have it. But let's have it about deceit that is of consequence, lying about wars and imagined enemies, taking people into battle, lying over a long period of time, whether it be in Vietnam or it's Gulf or Grenada, whether it's lying about the state of various kinds of problems. Let's have that kind of a discussion. And if that becomes the basis, not whether it's an impeachable offense, because that's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether we can find a mechanism by which to force people who are in power out of office. I'm all in favor of that if we have this expansive definition of morality.
All right, who wants to disagree with Paul? First of all, who wants to give Paul a stirring round of applause? Who disagrees with Paul? What's your name, sir?
David Shiguri from Boston.
What do you do, David?
I work in the workforce development system, and I would just disagree with the professor. If you want to talk about war, though, you could talk about Bosnia, for instance, where this person who has prevaricated for 7 years consistently, and I do think there's a pathology. This is not an isolated incident. Anyone that discusses it in that context is being disingenuous. Bosnia, he promised, I think, on 3 different occasions to bring the American troops back. One, and the senator could correct me, was the basis for a passage in the Senate. And I believe the American troops are still there. Now, I think that's a dangerous pathway, by the way, because that's what we're talking about, what was happening around Contra. You politicize foreign policy. You don't want to do that. But I think you have here a man that committed perjury, who definitely tried to affect potential testimony. And, you know, we have standards here. Sexual McCarthyism, maybe someone who can defend O.J. Simpson can come up with sexual McCarthyism. But, you know...
All right. We should probably stick to the topic at hand, but thanks for your thoughts. And you raise an interesting point. If someone more or less admits to having lied about sex, does that mean they would lie about other things, or is there something qualitatively different about lies about sex? What's your name?
Tracy Hughes. I live in Boston. What I want to say is a lot different. I'm going to leave the political hair splitting and the legalese to the lawyers. But what I have trouble with is the morality here and the fact that this man is our commander-in-chief. He's the leader of this country. And I don't think people believe him anymore. He has shown us that he's not worthy of our trust. And if this incident that happened over a long period of time with this woman in the White House, which, by the way, in my mind, makes it not private but public.
The president jokes sometimes that he lives in public housing.
Well, he does. But if that had occurred with an admiral and a subordinate, he would have been fired. He would have been kicked out of the office. If he was the CEO of a company and he was doing this with a subordinate in his office, he would have been kicked out by the board of directors as soon as it became known. And well, it has happened. But why is the president held to a different standard than the rest of us?
Who believes President Clinton? When he opens his mouth to speak, do you believe him? What's your name, first of all?
Howard Zinn.
You're getting a round of applause just for that. I think you're clap happy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a historian. And, you know, what strikes me is the amount of hypocrisy and loss of proportional thinking about this. Take the question of morality. Granted, there are problems of sexual morality here, but the very deep problems of immorality committed by Congress, committed by Republicans, committed by Democrats, committed by Clinton, really important issues. Lying, and I agree with Professor Watanabe there, yes, lying about war. I consider it a loss of moral authority when the Republicans and the Democrats get together to take away benefits from poor women raising children. I consider it a loss of moral authority when they take away food stamps from immigrants. I consider it a loss of moral authority when they go bombing places around the world and tell lies about it. And when they agree, the Republicans and Democrats agree on these lies, and then after all of these lies and all of these deceptions, which have consequences, life and death consequences for large numbers of people. I mean, take a million people dead in Iraq as a result of the, embargo and so on. All of these life and death consequences, and then they ignore all of that and fasten on this one set of events. And that, to me, is shameful. And I think it's up to the American public to restore a larger sense of morality and ask, what is our country doing? Not what is the president doing in the Oval Office.
All right, Mr. Zinn, thanks very much. All right, we'll hear more from our audience and more from the experts coming up right after this. We'll be right back.
The appropriate penalty for this president may ultimately be impeachment, but not removal. He must answer for his behavior before the Senate. And then if he is retained, that's how he regains legitimacy. A president needs both political and legal legitimacy to lead this country. And if he has only political legitimacy, it's like a partially impeached president.
Welcome back to our town hall meeting on the presidency and the law. Let's go back to our panel of experts here and talk a little bit about some of these allegations. Senator Simpson, there is an allegation in the Starr report, which I think you can fairly characterize as extraordinary, regardless of where you come down on this issue, where the suggestion is that President Clinton engaged in abuses of power, obstruction of justice, by not telling the truth in the beginning, spending 7 months not telling the truth, and allowing his lawyers to argue certain privileges on his behalf. Why should, if somebody is relying on their lawyers to argue for them, why should that then be a basis to say we're going to remove you from office? Does that trouble you?
I think that everyone agrees that's about the weakest part of the report, so you've hit upon it. Might go back to the strongest parts of the report, which are, obstruction of justice, collusion in a sense, talking about, now we're going to do an affidavit here, but I want to respond to this gentleman over here. I always had trouble with professors. I never graduated cum laude. I graduated thank the laude. I raised 3 children who are remarkable. 2 of them are lawyers and 1 is an art dealer. And I had a sick idea about parenthood. I taught them not to lie. And I taught them not to cheat. And I taught them not to steal. And when they did, they had to go apologize and do it honestly. And if anyone thinks today in society that it's all right to lie, all right to cheat, all right to have affairs with people who are your subordinates, then this country's in a hell of a lot of trouble.
But what about, let me ask you this. The supporters of the president would say, we don't disagree with what you're saying here. Absolutely wrong. But the supporters of the president would say, we need a sense of proportionality here. Does that lie that he gave, that he clearly expressed, is that of such a nature that we should then trigger the most dramatic penalty that our Constitution, it's the constitutional equivalent of capital punishment?
Well, that's for some remarkable men and women to figure out, and it's called the Judiciary Committee of the House, and it consists of Henry Hyde, the chairman, and John Conyers, the ranking member, 2 very reasonable and responsible men and their minions, and they will decide that. It won't matter what you decide in this chamber.
You know what I think? I think the allegation about abuse of power, which is by all accounts the weakest, as Senator said, and the other allegations in the Starr report that have nothing to do with the core question, including those, really hurt Starr and hurts his credibility. And it's interesting. It's like on August 17th when the president gave his apology and he hated Starr so much that he had to attack him. The abuse of power and the allegations like Hillary was out of town, and trying to hurt their marriage, or the number of times Clinton told Monica Lewinsky he hadn't had an affair, or whether or not he'd had phone sex with her, that had nothing to do with the central allegations. That showed Starr's hatred of him. And just like the August 17th speech hurt the president, the abuse of power allegations and all this extra nothingness that is just to be mean, just core, good old-fashioned mean, it hurt Starr.
Let me make a radical suggestion. If we were to have a grand jury or a jury trying somebody for these kinds of charges, the first thing as a defense lawyer I would do is I would ask all of them if they have ever engaged in similar conduct, if their deliberations might be affected by the fact that they had hidden adulterous affairs or hidden perjury or lies. So what I'd like to do is see every member of the Judiciary Committee, starting with the great Senator, Congressman Hyde, raise his hand under oath and describe whether he's ever had an adulterous affair. The answer is yes. And whether he's ever lied about it, let him answer that question. Let's see whether these great men and women of the Congress and the Senate are left with a quorum.
Senator Simpson, I mean, how about, is that a fair question?
Pretty dramatically.
But is that a fair question for defenders of the president to pose to those that will act as his jurors, the way you would pose it in a criminal courtroom?
I'd like to ask Alan Dershowitz that. I'd like to see him raise his hand. That's what I'd like. So let's get off of that kick. That kick goes nowhere.
I'll
It's
do it if
smart,
you'll
Alec.
do it, Senator.
I'll do it in
Okay.
a minute. In a minute. In a minute, I'd do it. I was on federal probation for 2 years. I slapped a cop when I was in Laramie. What the hell? I mean, this is unbelievable. Caution.
I've never slapped a cop.
It's smart, Alec. That's all.
Kick
it
over
is.
to
What
Jody.
the hell?
Jody, you seem to be generating a little interest.
Actually, Senator Officer Wallace would like to see you outside.
I paid my dues. I was in the clink.
He paid his debt to society. Okay, who here has had an affair? Sure, the people who are out of microphone range raise their hands. And you're not even old enough to be married, so I doubt you could have had an affair. Anyway, you're raising your hand for another reason, I take it, Dan.
So far, some of these reasons I'm hearing seem to be the things my son at 6 years old would say. Well, the other guys were doing it, and, well, the guy who's accusing me is doing something wrong, rather than focusing on what the accused may have done. And those don't seem to be the right way to approach these accusations.
Excuse me for reaching in front of you, Officer Wallace.
That is qualified to pass judgment. And I think everybody in this room would acknowledge that a juror, a grand juror or a petty juror who had engaged
jury of his
in
peers
this
if they meet your
conduct
accusations?
would not be qualified to serve. And therefore, I think it is very fair. It is not a wise guy question. It is a very fair question to ask.
Ask it of John Conyers?
Of course I would.
All of them?
Of course, every one of them.
And you are
Every
moral
one of
authority.
them. No. I'm the defense lawyer asking the question of the jury. That's the traditional question a defense lawyer asks.
Let me jump in. We got about 30 seconds, I think, Jody.
30 seconds.
Yeah, I just have to say, I never thought I'd disagree with Professor Dershowitz on TV. However, I don't know that I'm ready, or the American people are ready, to go down the path of doing that to Congress. We already have a problem with the presidency. I don't want to see that happen now with Congress. So I think, while I understand what you're trying to say, I think that we really don't want to go down that path. There's one crisis is enough.
I agree. I was making a heuristic point.
I think that was a little satire we were seeing there. What's your name?
Eric Chapsis.
And what do you do in life, Eric?
I'm a Kennedy School student.
Of Professor Dershowitz's?
No, I'm not.
Okay, good. You might survive. All right. And we'll have more live from Boston after this. Please stay tuned.
and I will fight to ensure that censure never sees the light of day in this chamber.
Welcome back to our town hall meeting, our MSNBC town hall meeting here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Professor Nesson, let's move now from the allegations here to the question of punishment if it ever gets that far. That's a very big if, we all understand that. But to get a better sense of what we're talking about here, explain to us what the Constitution says about the punishments that are available in an impeachment process.
Impeachment is the punishment. If he's impeached, that's it.
Nothing more in terms of
There's
other options?
Not a word about censure in the Constitution.
Where does censure come from then as a possibility here?
Censure is just the power of the body. If we, right sitting here, said, let's censure the president, we could all vote on it and we could censure the president.
Let's do it and be done with it then. Move on.
I think he should be grounded.
Have the car keys taken away, right?
He's acted like an adolescent. You ought to be treated like an adolescent.
You're in for a month.
You know what I think we should do? I think that we should rely a little bit on the judge in the Arkansas case, and that he should be held in contempt, and that she should punish him, and then we can move on with this. I mean, he clearly needs some punishment. He has deceived us. He has been very bad. But to challenge and rock the very foundation of our democracy seems a little much for a poor affair.
Jody?
Jack, we've got someone here in a unique position to comment on all this. Chris, what'd you do last summer?
I worked in the White House. I was a White House intern.
Did anybody lay a hand on you, Chris?
No.
What was it? I mean, did you have access to the president and other, I mean, from where you sit? No, look. Where did we get this crowd? I mean, can you imagine what it must have been like, the atmosphere in that place at that time? Folks who've read the Starr Report all comment on all the things that were going on behind the scenes, not the sex per se, but the meeting someone in an office and meeting at the North Gate and all this behind the scenes kind of stuff going on. What did you see when you worked there? What was it like to be a White House intern?
Contrary to popular opinion, the interns really do not have access to any of the principals. You know, we're working real hard in all the policy offices, and the Monica Lewinsky thing is really an anomaly. That just doesn't happen.
Well, I wasn't expecting you to say that that was commonplace. But anyway, what do you think should happen to President Clinton?
Well, I believe very strongly in the direction that the Clinton administration has taken our country, and I feel very hurt that our national dialogue has been so corrupted by these allegations. And I think the impeachment process, whether or not Clinton is actually impeached or convicted, is going to corrupt our national dialogue further. And so I think for that reason, since I believe so strongly in the principles of the Clinton administration that the president should resign and our country should move on simply to keep things moving forward.
So that's interesting. A fan of President Clinton who thinks he should go. Anybody agree with that? Anybody? Let's see a show of hands, since we're into showing hands. Who actually supports President Clinton but thinks for the good of the country he should be gone? That's what you think, sir?
Yes. I definitely think that. I mean, I think I've read the Starr Report. What I find in there doesn't strike me as being impeachable, but it seems to me that censure simply wouldn't be enough. We have Al Gore in there. I mean, people talk about, well, getting rid of Clinton would undo the results of the election. Well, no, that would make Bob Dole the president. I mean, Al Gore...
Or actually, it would make the previous president, which is still Bill Clinton.
Well, exactly. I mean, you know, Al Gore is there for a reason. It seems to me that for the good of the country, Clinton ought to step down and let Al Gore, you know, come in and move forward, exactly as the former intern over here said.
And your name, sir?
Dan Kennedy. I work for the Boston Phoenix.
Oh, terrific. All right, I tell you what, we will get to you. Right now we have to take a short break. We will have more live from Cambridge coming up after this. Stay tuned.
We're back now, continuing our live town hall meeting. My buddy Jody has now
Finally
situated
taken my
herself
seat.
in the peanut gallery. Talk a little bit.
Yeah, really, the cheap seat's up here. What's your name?
Camille Redmond.
And what's your claim to fame in life, Camille?
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess I'm
still working on that. You're
I'm a
awfully
junior
young.
at the college. I guess that's my claim to fame, I suppose.
The college being Harvard?
Harvard, yes.
Oh, say no more. All right, what do you think?
I wanted to disagree with my colleague, Chris Kirkhoff. I think
The former intern.
The former intern. In order for us to move on as a country, I don't think that Clinton needs to resign. I think that we need to move on. We need to allow Clinton to finish his 2 years. We as a country need to come together, just allow him to present his domestic policy. Allow individuals to just listen to Clinton, just believe in what he's saying, and move on. If Gore comes into office, there's going to be a great deal of turmoil. There's going to be that transition, and that's going to pose a huge problem for this country. I really think that we need to move on. That's simply that.
All right, we know how she feels. Let's find out how the rest of the group feels, Jack, about exactly how we should proceed, even if only for practical reasons.
Let's do this. We got about a minute left here before we go to a break here. Let's get a sense from you folks. Let me give you the options here, and then we're going to ask for a show of hands. The options will be the president resigns. Second option will be impeachment proceedings are begun and the president is removed. Third option is impeachment proceedings will take place so that things can play out, and we'll have a national dialogue regardless of how it results. And last is nothing happens, move on. First option, show of hands, president resigns. How many? Second option, impeachment proceedings, the president is removed. Show of hands. Next option, impeachment proceedings, it works out however it works out. Last option, we move on, it's over.
And we have to move on right now.
We'll take a break. We'll be back. Stay with us.
In stereo.
I'm determined to lead this country and to focus on the issues that are before us.
I can forgive the man, but I think it's dishonored the position, the presidency.
There are a lot of lurid allegations in the prosecutor's referral, but there is no credible evidence of impeachable offenses.
Based on my reading of the report, I wouldn't impeach him.
I don't want to prejudge any of that. I think it's very important to allow the facts to lead the discussion.
He isn't going to be able to hold up under this sort of pressure.
We don't have a constitutional crisis. The Constitution is in place.